Excellent. Good evening and welcome to the SF Jazz Center. This is IIDA's Pioneers in Design, and I'm so pleased to have all of you here. I'm Lisa Bottom. I am the chapter president-elect, and as of Monday, I will be the president, and I'm thrilled to welcome you. For about the past 18 years, this chapter, the Northern California chapter of IIDA, has had this event called Pioneers in Design. And what we do every year is celebrate design pioneers, someone who is moving design forward in some fashion. And we have the privilege tonight of having John SanGiovanni with us, and you'll hear a lot more about what he's doing. Our theme this year as an entire organization is Design for the Future. And boy, are you going to see some things that really are exciting about the future and tools for moving design forward. And so now it's my privilege as a professional to introduce Steve McConnell, FAIA, lead AP, and the managing director, partner, director, I did it. I was not going to do that. Managing partner of NBBJ. He serves on the board of directors. Steve was responsible for directing the design of the world's largest LEED Platinum-rated nonprofit building campus for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And something that you all should know as we look at each other as professionals is that iron really does sharpen iron, and we're all better for some of the efforts our competitors have made to move the profession forward. Steve is here tonight because NBBJ served as the incubator for the work that John is doing or has been doing, and I think you're just going to be amazed tonight at what you see. So please join me in welcoming our awesome moderator, Steve McConnell. Come on up, Steve.
All right, it's really great to be here this evening, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce John. That's really my main job, and then help facilitate the conversation. But I realize I have a job to do, which is to ease you into high energy, because you are in for such a treat tonight. This guy is going to rock this place, and the work that John is doing to delineate the future and actually for us to access that future today in terms of how we can connect with, communicate with, enable our clients and our colleagues to understand what we're doing in ways we never understood before in really powerful ways is just amazing. So I do want to honor this introduction and give you guys some really good insights about John's background. And so with that, I'm just going to refer to a few notes here. So John has more than 2 decades of experience as an entrepreneur, strategist, and inventor. He has authored 20 patents in the areas of mobile UI, wearable hardware systems, and augmented reality, many of which have been licensed and purchased by Apple and Microsoft. He has led product teams that have shipped 30 top-tier apps for iOS, Android, 10 of which have achieved top 5 status in their respective app category and won major digital interactive awards on behalf of American Express, General Motors, NBC, and others. He has been and served as a technical evangelist for Microsoft Research, where he led external academic research funding in the areas of mobile technology and augmented reality. And check this out, he co-invented Microsoft's tile-based home screen metaphor, which is now used by more than 1 billion devices worldwide. As an influential thought leader and technology industry expert, John's articles have appeared in numerous publications. He's presented at industry conferences around the globe, including your event tonight, TEDx Seattle, MIT Ventures Summit, and the International Festival of Creativity in Cannes. He co-founded Zoomobi. He serves on the board of directors. He co-founded Team XBot, which is a really cool nonprofit in the Pacific Northwest focused on technology mentorship to inner city high schools. And he's an alumnus of the University of Florida. Now, very important, and moving on from some of these stats, is John is a designer. And when you think about design, it's a capital D, designer, but a designer in the space of technology and how we work and how we communicate. And just a little bit more, since somebody got some insight about me, John is the son of an architect and interior designer, so there's a nice link there. But perhaps more fascinating is he is a former Ninja Turtle at Disney World. How about that? A round of applause. He's one of the most positive, energetic guys you'll ever meet, and with absolute sincerity, I think is innovating the future of how we stay relevant in our role to communicate and lead the profession of design. So welcome, John.
Exciting! This is an incredibly exciting time, and I am in awe of you. I'm in awe of the spaces you create and the way they make me feel. I'm in awe of your time and attention tonight because we're going to be talking about how, in my belief, the next 10 years promise to be as even more exciting than the last 10 years have been, and that's saying quite a bit. As you know, it's been an incredibly thrilling and energizing time in the renaissance of mobile computing and wireless and superphones, but I actually think that we're on the precipice of an even more exciting revolution. So since you teased out this silly Ninja Turtle background, I have to give you a little bit more context. So it turns out that when you grow up in Orlando, Florida, you're afforded all kinds of interesting professional opportunities. And I was encouraged by my mom to audition as a character performer back in the 90s, and I actually was selected as Pluto, the dog character, and I loved doing meet and greets as Pluto. That was super fun. But then one day, there was this flyer on the door that said very clearly, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are coming to Walt Disney World. And of course, as you know, or maybe you know, the Ninja Turtles are not Disney characters, but Disney licensed them in the 90s for a stage show. So I saw that and I was like, be a Ninja Turtle, a superhero, 6 times a day and get paid for it? Done, I'm there. So I show up to the audition a few weeks later, and I push the doors of the audition hall open. And something had gone terribly wrong. It turns out that I probably should have read the rest of the casting call, which said very clearly, important, all applicants must have a black belt in multiple martial arts, preferably with an expertise in weapons exhibition. I had taken like one Aikido class at University of Florida. And so there's all these like world-class martial arts with, with swords, and they're doing backflips, and they're in their gis, and I show up in like sweats and a t-shirt like, hi, I'm Pluto. So at this point, anyone in their right mind would have kind of stealthily, exited to the back of the room or exited the room. But at that point, I was too mentally invested. So I'm like, you know what? I've got to be Ninja Turtle. So what I did was I stealthily worked my way to the back of the line, and I'm watching these other applicants audition. There was this like panel of judges, kind of a American Idol, Turtle, parallel universe type thing. And so they're doing these very precise, like, martial arts moves that I didn't know. But I observed that they're all like super intense, and they're so focused on their sort of martial arts movements that they're not emoting. This is Disney. You have to be the character. In fact, one of the things you're taught in character training is that you have to smile for every picture. Because even though the guests can't see your face, the expression on your face telegraphs through the costume and out into the park. So I'm like, okay, here's my strategy. If I have a chance in hell of getting this job, if all these dudes are like 10 out of 10 from the neck down, I have to be 15 out of 10 from the neck up. So I'm watching their moves, and like when it was my time to audition, I'm like, like I'm doing all this crazy, just like, And when I get to the table, they're laughing hysterically, which is not what you're going for in an audition generally. But at this point, they like look at each other, they don't know what to do, and so so I got the job, and they made me Leonardo the leader, which was hilarious. So. But actually, as you'll learn, is that actually was a wonderful journey. And when I graduated, I actually moved into the technology group at Disney, and that's really when I got bit by the bug on the transformative potential of immersive computing technology. Because as it turns out, back in the 90s, Disney was one of very few organizations that was investing aggressively in virtual and augmented reality. And so that's when I really got my first taste of this as a transformative medium for human communication, and certainly has been a through line of my journey since. I'm just going to grab the clicker real quickly. So I want to talk about sort of what we mean when we talk about immersive computing technology. I feel like VR, AR, MR, XR, we've sort of done ourselves a disservice with this alphabet soup because it's unnecessarily confusing and complicating. But one way to think about it is like in this continuum of computing technologies, from mainframes to PCs to portable computers, certainly superphones and the phones that are in all of your pockets now, and then virtual reality, and then later augmented reality. It's interesting to think of this as kind of version 6.0 of computing. I actually think a little bit more significantly, I think that immersive computing technologies is version 2.0. You can think about a bunch of two-dimensional computing stuff, and then there's this new generation of three-dimensional computing stuff. And we have, spent tens of millions of years evolving wetware focused on computing and communicating in three-dimensional space. So it's this kind of silly artifact that we were computing in two dimensions for a very brief period of time. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and it's extraordinarily difficult for me to explain to her that once upon a time, you would make a phone call on a device that was tethered into the wall with a cable in one particular room in your house. In my lifetime, like I remember when we got a second phone, and that was like a big deal. And she just cannot even grok that. Like it's such a hard concept. She's like, well, once it's charged, can't you just unplug it? I'm like, no, actually, that's actually not for power. That's actually the signal. She's like, well, no, the signal just goes into the air, And so, as hard as it is to explain that concept to her, I would submit to you today that it will be way harder for her to explain to her kids that once upon a time, all of our digital information was presented to us through these silly rectangular slabs of glass and silicon, whether they're flat screens or phones in our pocket or tablets. We are at this precipice where the computing is quite literally spilling out of the screen and into the world around us. And the exciting news is that those of you in this room are better suited than anyone to understand this revolution and for it to bring you creatively to another place, because you've been communicating in three-dimensional space your entire career. You understand how spaces make you feel. So it's a very, very exciting time. Now, in the sort of continuum there between AR and VR, again, sort of I'll unpack this alphabet soup just a little bit, but it's my belief that very soon, all of VR even will be a footnote on the Wikipedia page of AR. And these current generation of technologies are very enterprise-focused, and they are sort of, in many cases, sort of by geeks for geeks. But very soon, they're going to start to look like this. They're going to be, sort of stylish eyewear, and they will get smaller. This is current generation AR headwear, but very soon it'll be indistinguishable from the glasses that I'm wearing right now. And in fact, if you think about this, not in the context of computing generations, but if you think about it in the continuum of human communication, we could actually zoom out, and we'll see that, we have a reasonable shot, I think, at this revolution. Yeah, sorry for my photos. But this actually has a chance of being version 7.0 of human communication, starting with emotion and then speaking, super useful. Go species. But then, drawing and sculpture and writing. And a quick point about that, the only reason why we have cultivated sketching in 2 dimensions is because generally in the history of humankind, it's been easier to sketch in 2 dimensions than it is in 3 dimensions. But we're, again, on the precipice of this moment in time where you'll be able to sketch in 3 dimensions just as easily, if not more easily, than you do in 2 dimensions, and that's exciting. Scaled transmission and global internetworking, and then this kind of moment of telepresence. And if you look at the timeline of each of these innovations, it's taken us a while to get here. Not a foregone conclusion when this last one happens, but I would submit to you that we're at, let's call it -1 year. When this actually starts to enter the marketplace. And I'll provide evidence to that in the form of the devices that are in the market today and soon. So this is very, very exciting to me. Now, you would be forgiven to look at that continuum of AR and VR technology and say, that's cool, it's interesting, it's not for me. Even though I design in three-dimensional space, I actually can wield a pretty impressive array of 3D tools, you might say. And honestly, I just don't feel like this technology is really something that I would be interested in purchasing, and certainly not something that I would use every day. And so I would just challenge you in this next bit to imagine with me a near future. Many of you probably have a pretty nice continuum of Apple-branded devices, from watches to phones to tablets to Apple TVs. In fact, by show of hands, raise your hand if you own at least one of all these. Look at that. They nailed the demographic. So awesome. This is, so you have these devices. Now, you might say, you know what, my computing needs are totally taken care of. I'm not going to go out and buy one of these silly AR, VR rigs anytime soon. But imagine one day that you show up at the Apple store, and there's this new device. Looks like a stylish pair of eyewear. You put it on, turns on, it has like variable opacity lenses. You can turn up and down sunglass mode at your leisure. In fact, you can even turn up and down kind of color night vision mode, so you might actually not need to use a flashlight ever. And that's just sort of like enhancing your visual system. But then something interesting happens is the clerk at the Apple store says, hey, give me your Apple login real quickly, and you quickly log into this little section, and they say, can I borrow your Apple Watch for a moment? And you have this very nice Apple Watch, you remove it, you hand it to the clerk, and then all of a sudden, you look at your wrist, and that's weird. The same exact model of Apple Watch that you happen to own is on your wrist through augmented reality. Your eyewear is tracking your hand at frame rate, so as fast as you move it, it stays perfectly pinned to your wrist. And by the way, all the technology to do that is shipping in volume today. And it's also tracking your hands, 10 digits at frame rate. So that means that the weird thing is, even though this watch weighs 0 ounces, you can actually interact with it just like you would your previous app. All your previous apps are installed on there, just like you would previously. But there's an additional button, and it looks like a little iPhone. So you push that button, and then an iPhone appears in your hand, 0 ounces. It's the exact same model of iPhone that you own. And you can interact with it. You launch some things. You play Pokemon Go because you have it installed. You play with your mapping application. But then you stumble across a New York Times article. And you push a button on that New York Times article, and now all of a sudden, this device morphs into a tablet of impossible size and 0 ounces of weight. That's cool. But then you come across a video, and you push play on that video, and then all of a sudden, hovering in front of you is a screen of whatever size you deem is useful, pinned to whatever wall is nearby or hovering in midair, and visible to whomever is nearby you at that moment. And so that little charade that I just walked through is making a case for the fact that maybe these glasses actually will start to consume some of these other devices in your world. And look, I have no idea what Apple's AR, VR plans are. That's just one example. But that's actually quite a silly example because it's plagued by all of my intellectual baggage because I've spent the last 40-plus years computing in 2 dimensions. The reality is that this new computing technology, you get 3D for free. Right? So now think about the scenario that, like, of course you're not going to play Pokemon Go on your screen. You're going to launch the Pokemon Go app, and a Pokemon will appear there, and you'll grab a Pokeball and throw it, and and catch the creature. Of course, you won't read an article about a recent, demonstration. You will be standing amidst that demonstration, experiencing it live, right? And you most likely won't be projecting a 2-dimensional screen so you can watch video. You'll be doing something that's much more interactive and much more experiential. So again, I would submit to you that slowly each of these devices might be replaced by this computing hardware. And I might even say that if you fast forward maybe 1 iPhone generation, maybe 1.5 iPhone generations, so let's say 12 to 15 years from now, you might not know anyone who actually uses a cell phone day to day. You might actually find that this immersive computing technology, glasses initially, soon contact lenses, will start to take over some of your natural computing methods. A little bit about what's brought me on this journey. So I already talked about my entertainment experience at Disney, but I should also mention that I was on the deployment team for a technology called Disney Vision, which was really the first consumer virtual reality experience. You can see it there, kind of Aladdin themed. It was a very cool multi-user experience. It was quite impressive, especially for 1994 VR, but it was also $250,000 an eye. So it was a 4-user system, so do the math. There was, like, behind that screen is 2 SGI reality engines running 1 eye each. So it was very advanced for the time. And then later in my role at Microsoft Research, I collaborated with some of the kind of best thinkers in augmented reality, including Dr. Stephen Feiner at Columbia University, and he and his team had just produced, to my knowledge, the first mobile augmented reality system called MARS, the acronym. And that person is actually walking around Columbia campus and seeing digital labels being projected on the actual buildings. So I very early got bit by the bug by what is the transformative potential of this technology and what solutions are available. Fast forward to today, we have an impressive biodiversity of AR and VR gear. By show of hands, how many of you have spent some time in any one of these devices? Anyone? So yeah, good. So certainly the majority of folks have spent time in AR or VR systems, which I would expect for this audience. Rather than walking you through each one of these columns, just some definitions. So you'll often hear a 3DOF or 6DOF. That typically means 3 degrees of freedom or 6 degrees of freedom. And that's a significant differentiator in AR and VR systems. 3 degrees of freedom means that it can project images to each eye at the 3 degrees of movement, including sort of this, and this. So, as you're looking around, it can actually make you feel that you're present remotely. The 6 degrees of freedom adds the 3 kind of translation vectors, so you can actually move around, you can look at things. And many of the high-end systems, sort of high-price, high-presence systems like the HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift are those 6 degree of freedom systems. The challenge with those is most of the times they're tethered to a high-end PC. They require sensors in the room that track your absolute location. But that is all changing right now. As recently as the last few months and the next few months. So the 2 most important developments at this moment is one device is the Oculus Quest, which for this level of kind of price to presence ratio basically lobbed a 0 off the price. So this kind of experience was in the neighborhood of $2,000 to $4,000, and now it costs $400. So it's just a self-contained device, headset, 2 hands, full 6 degrees of freedom movement, and incredible biodiversity of applications and games. Complete step change, and that happened in the last 4 weeks. Really exciting. We're on the precipice of the release of the 2nd generation of Microsoft's HoloLens device. So HoloLens is in a category of devices called augmented reality. And augmented reality devices use the same inside-out tracking methods that the Oculus Quest uses, but they add a very important method, which is they have a transparent display. So the combination of that inside-out tracking that's from your noggin out, looking at the world, modeling at frame rate, it means that you can place a digital object on the table, and because it knows your location relative to that table at frame rate, it means that that can be redrawn perfectly aligned with that table. So this notion of environmental pinning is very real, where you can sort of walk around the object and you can interact with it in a quite unique way. HoloLens 2 brings in hand tracking, 10 fingers, perfect, so you can reach out and you can grab the object, which is hard and new. And the last thing is gaze tracking. So it tracks both of your eyeballs at frame rate also. So it knows exactly what you're looking at, and you can use that as an interactive method. HoloLens 2 is quite a bit more expensive, $3,500 compared to the $3,900 of the Oculus Quest. But that ability of projecting digital information into the real world is quite compelling. And of course, if you want to, you can just turn the lenses opaque and project yourself into a virtual or remote world. So it's an incredibly exciting time, kind of at the high end of these devices. I'm pretty desensitized to AR and VR demos after being in this industry for 20 years, and I'll say that my time in the HoloLens 2 is the single most impressive technical demo I've ever had. That device is not necessarily going to be a consumer device to enable the scenario I described earlier, but it is going to be a device that's going to start to show up in your workplace, in the enterprise, and it's going to show up in the AEC vertical. It will be one of the first ones where we start using that on a regular basis. I also want to talk about this configuration because I'm also a big fan of hyperscale. So a lot of times, we as technologists and designers will get very intellectually fixated on the advanced technology of a certain technical solution, but we won't think about the power of scalability. And scale is such an powerful concept. So this is a $5 piece of plastic that pops out, and these 2 lenses attach to any phone using Google's VR standard. And really, pretty much any cell phone up to 3 years old can be transformed into a surprisingly capable AR or VR headset. So I'm a big fan of that method. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. I also want to talk about what's happening in software, because this is just as important. So one of the important developments of what's happening in software is this notion of immersive creation. Most of the time when you're going to use AR or VR in the workplace today, you'll be using a traditional 2-dimensional authoring method, Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, Enscape, whatever you're using for visualization and modeling. And then you laboriously extract that content into VR and you experience it in VR, or you communicate with it in VR. And that's wonderful. But there's a growing number of applications that are designed around immersive authoring. So my favorite and the first one to market is Tilt Brush. Raise your hand if you've used Tilt Brush. Okay, if you haven't used Tilt Brush, you have homework. Find the biggest VR nerd in your office and just say, I want you to plug me into Tilt Brush for 1 hour and leave me alone. And that is, if there's one thing you take out of this meeting, that's what you want to do. Because Tilt Brush is a new category of art called sculptural sketching, where you're actually drawing, and because it persists, you can actually sketch and walk around your creation, sketch things at human scale. You can reach to your other hand. You can change your colors on the palette. You can scale things up and down. It requires no training. You'll be drawing beautiful objects within 30 seconds, and I promise there will be a smile on your face and your mind will expand. So please, please do that if you haven't done so. So I've now put hundreds of people into Tilt Brush of all ages, and it's such an interesting observation. Whenever I put a grown-up in Tilt Brush, I say, draw a cube. And they do what we would all do. They sort of draw this silly, projected two-dimensional cube. But when you put a kid in VR and you say, draw a cube, they do it correctly. Every time. It's bonkers. They draw a square, they walk through the square, they draw another square, and they connect the dots. So like, okay, what's next? And like they just get it instantly. The other thing they do is they don't like formally stand up and walk around. They're laying down on the floor, Michelangelo style, they're sketching like crazy. I've seen this over and over and over again. It's a new type of art. And very soon, that will be enabled, not with a heavy, expensive, $5,000 rig, but with your eyeglasses that you buy from your favorite technology provider. Very cool. Also from Google, Blocks is the same thing, but really solids modeling. You do basic modeling and geometric modeling, also great. If you want to split your hour, 30 minutes on each, I'll pass as well. And then Microsoft Maquette is a little bit more of an advanced modeling tool, a little bit more of a learning curve, but gives you more capability, text entry, and even lets you export back into some of your existing workflow tools. So if you want to start to bring this into your workflow. And the one I want to call out, because this is shipping actually in the next few weeks, is Dreams from Sony on PlayStation. And this is amazing because it's not just art. It's art and animation and modeling and some basic scripting. And you can actually make these animated or interactive experiences using brushes and modeling. Higher learning curve, but all you need is a PlayStation VR, and you can very easily kind of create and communicate. So this is a trend I'm tracking very, very closely because I think that it really is kind of a new way that humans will create, and I would just encourage that you expose yourself to that if you haven't already done so. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about my current research project, which is called Visual Vocal, and it's sort of informed by this notion that the highest bandwidth method of human communication is not video. It's actually pretty simple. You do it every day. It's talking while pointing. So you go to any client communication. Typically, you're talking while pointing. You're talking while pointing to a screen. You go to a Boeing factory. It's just people talking while pointing. That's what people do. So visual and vocal, it's a very, very important, powerful concept, and we've been working very diligently to imagine that, and I'm excited to show it to you. I'll say that we're going to do a little bit of an experiment tonight together, and like any great experiment, it has a relatively high likelihood of exploding, but if it doesn't, it'll be super rad. So if you're interested in participating in this wacky experiment, the first thing I would say is that I will be projecting this virtual reality experience down the aisles in a way that I will disclose in a moment. So what that means is that if one of the seats on the aisles is not occupied, you should move over and take that seat. And I would also say that this is a good time to jump on the system Wi-Fi. The credentials are there. If you're not sitting in the aisle, you're not going to have the full experience. But if you really, really want to participate, you can do this as well. But I will say that those on the aisle will really get the focus of the VR experience. And then just fly by your favorite app store, iPhone or Android, and install Visual Vocal, just like it sounds. The two blue triangles, just look for those. Important, please enable mic access. Thank you in advance for trusting me. I promise not to do anything nefarious. But that's important because it's a meeting technology, so we use that. Now, this thing that I'm going to show you is not my work. It's the work of an incredibly talented tribe of innovators back in Seattle, Washington. And you can see people are making a run for the aisles. So this is this sort of group, and we have this tradition where whenever a new Marvel movie comes out, we all sort of make a pilgrimage over to this amazing theater in Seattle called the Cinerama, and we stop at the new Amazon spheres and take a photograph, so you see the progression of the spheres. But I just want to call out that what you're about to see is actually the amazing creative and technical work of these folks from the visual vocal tribe, and not my own. So I often talk about, whenever you're trying to innovate a disruptive solution, you really have to think about this elegant interaction between design and engineering, between the what and the how. And we like to employ this protocol where we sort of call it the 30-70 rule, where you want to make sure that your designers have 30% technical acumen and that your engineering team has 30% creative acumen for two reasons. Number one is that they share a language, but more importantly, they have tremendous respect for the other tribe, so that they can say, wow, I'm pretty good at knowing how to build something technical and complex, but you're way better at that. Or the engineering team will say, I'm pretty good at understanding user flows and interaction design, but you're way better at that. And having that kind of respect and collaboration in software is critically important. And then on the other axis, we have this notion of art and science. So the art of a project like this is about the unconstrained potential of the human mind, grounded by the known possibilities of science as we've forged it today. And the reason why I pull this diagram up is when you're doing a venture-backed technology startup, particularly in a domain as unconstrained as augmented reality, most frontier technology companies wait way too long before talking to a real customer. So we did something actually quite unique and disruptive, which is that quite literally the third co-founder of the visual vocal venture is the renowned architectural firm NBBJ. So their partnership owns part of the company, but also participates and guides our hand intellectually and creatively in terms of what is really useful. And what's been really amazing about my collaboration with Steve and his team is that Steve was actually the first one to say, yeah, architects are going to love this, but the construction industry is going to go bananas over this communication technology. And he was 100% right. So really being able to have this incredible perspective across the spectrum of the AEC industry has served us incredibly well and also tested our mettle. So they've been able to deploy it at scale on some of the largest projects in the world and really understand what is useful. So we rapidly developed this acronym that we use sometimes critically, to describe other VR systems. And the acronym is CBNU. Cool, but not useful. So the idea is that a lot of these systems tickle a lot of neurons and maybe they put a smile on somebody's face, but I'll just submit to you that my point of view about the use of VR in a meeting is generally not super positive. The whole pass the headset pattern, first of all, it's pretty gross. But also it's not actually the best way to communicate. A lot of times you have somebody in VR who might not be super comfortable and they're self-conscious because people are observing them in VR, and then you're sort of passing the headset from person to person as everybody watches on. And we really wanted to create communication systems that support large groups of people, like some of you in this audience, all in VR together interacting. So now is the time to talk a little bit about kind of what we've built. And I know that as designers of space, you often struggle with communicating spatial concepts to people who might not have tremendous fluency in reading a two-dimensional floor plan, for example. And so this is a constant struggle where there's a tremendous degree of trust, where your clients trust in you implicitly to be able to make the right choices for them. And there's constantly a challenge to really help communicate in 3 dimensions. And it was very hard for us to communicate the value propositions that we're driving toward. We want to support meetings. We want to support messaging. We want to support the capture of the real world, but also teleporting you into a virtual world. We want to support AR. We want to support VR. We want to support all this and sort of create, if you will, sort of the PDF of this AR, VR future. So the way that we describe our features is kind of goofy. It's through human superpowers. Maybe this comes from all those trips to go see Marvel movies. But the first feature is teleportation. So the ability to be able to teleport someone to a job site instantly, where all you have is your phone, and you can capture a depth map of the space with any cell phone, and you can create one of these scenes. And we call this object a VV, which is, of course, is an abbreviation for the company name, but a VV is really designed to be this object that can be easily shared and sent. The teleportation concept is often asynchronous communication. So in the AC industry, we love meetings. We love the theater of the meeting. But I often say that many people might buy Visual Vocal for the meeting, but actually the thing that makes them fall in love with AR and VR is using it as a messaging medium. Being able to bottle up some insights and send it to somebody so that when they walk into the site, they can stand there and be transformed with your insights and your voice, maybe even time traveling on the site, which brings me to my second and third use cases. So the usefulness of being able to peel back the walls and see where the pipes actually were, being able to see progress, achieving X-ray vision through those periodic captures of a job site is very, very empowering. And the last one we simply call mind merge because mind meld is a Paramount Vulcan Star Trek trademark. But mind merge is the next best thing, which allows you to literally inhabit the noggin of someone before then. So imagine a world where you walk into a job site or even a completed project, and then you see this sphere hovering at roughly the height of your head, and you snap your head into that, and all of a sudden you hear the voice of the architect that designed the space. You see their markup and their sketching over top of the space. Maybe even you travel back in time and see as the idea developed in sketch form and in construction. And we call that experience a productive hallucination. Imagine when our worlds are peppered with these incredible hallucinations that are creative and expressive. This is the future that we're trying to build with Visual Vocal. Okay, it's time for our wacky experiment. I'm very excited to do this with you. I'm a little bit terrified that we're going to do a 50-person VR experience with 49 phones that I've never seen before, but just bear with me. So the first thing that I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you launch the Visual Vocal app. Very, very important that you enable microphone access. Something kind of interesting is that before the session started, on the aisles, on both sides of the aisles, we hid one of these cool VR headsets under the chair. So I invite you, if you're on the aisles, to reach down under the chair and grab that viewer. So you'll see it most likely sort of near the stairway, right near the leg. You might have to hunt for it a little bit. It's not taped in, it's just sort of stuck on there. This is a little bit of an Oprah moment. You get VR, you get VR, you get VR, you get VR. And I would say, those of you that sat in these seats around the aisle, you get a chance to take a look at Visual Vocal. I'm actually going to fire up a Visual Vocal session remotely and give you a sneak peek. So for those of you that are on the aisle, let me just connect real quickly. So we're going to use quite a unique method where I'm going to host one of these VVs in the cloud, and you can see that in a moment my screen will come to life with an immersive virtual reality scene. And you can see in this case we're standing kind of on a construction job site. I can pan around. This is actually the F5 tower back in Seattle. And what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to connect us all into the same session. So I'm going to have you, if you have the app installed, I invite you to load our home screen and once again point your screen to me. Okay, nice, this is awesome. So now I'm going to generate a series of audible pairing tones that will be heard by your phones, speaker to microphone, and they will magically begin downloading some virtual reality content. That's coming to you in 3, 2, 1. Look at that, sweet. Okay, we're gonna hit you again, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Boom. Okay, some of you didn't give us microphone access. I won't hold it against you. So check it out. You guys are all popping into this connection. A handful of you are popping in, slowly but surely. You'll slowly join in to the connection, but I'm going to dive into the demo, and then eventually you'll have a look. So if you have those viewers, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to rotate your phone landscape left so that the top of your phone is in your left hand. And you're going to want to slide the viewers so that they're kind of over top of your phone. And when you hold them right up to your eyes, you should see virtual reality. Raise your hand if you're standing in a construction job site. Sweet. Okay, good. Good, good. Okay. Nicely done. Now, by the way, if you don't have the VR viewers, you can still participate in this full screen mode just by simply going into this back arrow, and you see that button that says turn VR on and off. You can just turn VR off and return to the meeting, and you'll get right in there. So, or maybe you have a case like I do. Wait for it. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So now here's the cool thing. We're all in there together at the same time. So you can actually see me drawing on the door. Do you guys see that in VR? So imagine the usefulness of being able to highlight a feature in VR. Also, do you see this hotspot right here on the wall? This is a hotspot that enables that feature that I was telling you about called time travel. So I'm going to pop this open, and you see these two options. It says this week and last week. I'm going to travel us all back in time by 1 week in 3, 2, 1. Sweet. Awesome. This is the mind merge. So I'll turn the walls back on. Very cool. All right, now this time, if you look down at the floor, you will see there's this little teleportation widget. So I'm gonna teleport us into the model for this building. So we're all gonna fade to black in 3, 2, 1. And we're gonna reappear at the base of the model. And this time, look up the side of the model. You should get a surprising sense of human scale. With, turns out cell phones with a little piece of plastic and some optics, a pretty good VR headset. You see this hotspot right here in front of you? This is a different type of hotspot. This is from the model, an optioneering hotspot. So when I pop this open, you'll see it pop open on your screens. And you see this diagonal cross bracing every one floor? Well, you'll notice that the design team, the structural engineering for this building, did some studies. Every one floor, let's see it every 3 floors. So there it is, cross bracing every 3 floors or every 6 floors. And so the host is synchronized and able to kind of communicate in a very efficient way. Okay, the last scene, we were hoping to teleport you over into the Amazon spheres, but it turns out that file didn't come across. So I'm going to show you one last scene, which is if you teleport up here into this hotspot right here, we're all going to fade to black in 3, 2, 1. We're going to go inside the building, this time with a very high quality render. This time look down. Don't jump. Surprising human scale. This is actually an interior design study. It turns out that on this commercial building, this is an NBBJ project where there was some discussion that is fairly open for a multi-tenant building. So they designed this very cool gold occlusion screen that's going to fade in 3, 2, 1. And now you can see that screen kind of fade into view. And I can turn it off. Okay, now against the advisement of my engineering team, I'm going to do one last wacky thing. You might have noticed that there is this, so let's check you all out. This is rad. All right, we got to be breaking some kind of VR record right now. So here we go. You might notice that I turned on a very important feature for large-scale events, which is disable inking for attendees. And generally, this system is used not for 50 people, but it's used for 5 people or 10 people that are in different locations. The cool thing is that as long as they can hear that tone, even over, for example, over a Polycom, then they can actually participate in the VV conversation. But I want to show you something, which is I'm going to teach you how our inking system works. I'm doing this at my peril, but it's going to be super fun. You're going to get like 30 seconds of the most insane kindergarten crayon fest that you've ever seen. So here's how it works. Resist the urge to draw with your finger. When you move your finger across the screen, that rotates the sphere around your head. Our drawing method is different and more precise. Here's how it works. The whole screen is one big button. So you use your dominant thumb in the corner of the screen, doesn't matter where you touch your thumb. What matters is while you're holding your thumb, you move your targeting reticle and it will leave a trail, okay? And then you lift your finger and it will slowly fade out. So it's designed to be just this, not for sketching a solution, but for example, you can say, hey, what do you guys think about this conference room right here? And I can sketch it, and as long as I hold my finger down, it stays on, but when I lift my finger, it elegantly alpha fades out. All right, I'm gonna turn on inking for 50 people. Get ready, here it comes. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom! Now, start drawing. Just go to town. Yes! Amazing. Don't draw anything offensive, everybody's watching. All right, well, that's the big finish. So thank you for your participation. So that was just, again, kind of a science experiment. Thank you for participating. But it also kind of teases out that we're on the precipice of really a step change in the way that we think about communicating in three-dimensional space. And it's an incredibly empowering time to be a designer of space, because you are about to have a whole new set of tools that have never been made available to us. So I'm very excited in this next phase to actually have Steve, who is one of the best facilitators I've ever met, to really get your thoughts and comments and questions about what does this mean for the industry? What does this mean for the built environment? And how will we together create incredibly inspiring spaces with this technology? So let me invite Steve up.
All right.
Awesome.
Good job. So I think we have a couple of microphones. Is that right? And would anyone like to jump right out with a burning question? Otherwise, I actually have questions ready to go. So with that, thinking about this amazing demo, John, and everyone participating in the drawing activity, like, what about the possibilities of visual vocal and the democratization of design and the engagement of vast groups of users, the public? What do you think about that?
It's an awesome question, and it's something that, that we have thought a lot about. If you think about the way that you engage in an urban planning conversation today, usually it's difficult to have a shared language and to have both an in-person forum, but also a vocabulary that is shared with distributed groups. The ability for people to be able to learn how to communicate quickly, be able to do it on a device that's fairly broadly deployed. But also, this is, again, a very important concept, is the ability to do it asynchronously. So everything that you saw, and in fact, now that you have the app installed, I invite you to look at the samples, because every one of those hotspots actually has my voice and my sketching and my variations previously recorded, loaded into that little hotspot. And that communicates the potential of this as a messaging vehicle. So you can imagine engaging with tens of thousands of people who will never be in a meeting at the same time, but they can all drop in at their leisure. They can experience the design intent of a space. They can participate. So even in large office spaces where you're trying to engage large groups. It also raises that, needless to say, there are pretty profound social complexities, which in our brief time together today, we haven't had a chance to address. But I'll say that one of the things that I'm most concerned about is making sure that this technology is made available across a wide socioeconomic continuum, because we're entering a time when literally people will see different things based on access. So that also is a very important consideration as we together design these technologies.
So you touched briefly on the vocal aspect, and it might be good just to elaborate a little bit on how you can record messages and how those are nested in the app.
Yes, so you all already know how to make a VV. All you really need to know is that drawing method, which is touch your finger and draw. And importantly, that when you're, when you're a subscriber to the system and you're actually communicating bidirectionally with a large group, it's actually listening to your voice while you're inking. So you're able to say, hey, I'm not sure, I didn't think that this element was going to go here. I actually thought it was going to go over elsewhere. And you're loading that into the system. Could be 1 o'clock in the morning in your living room. You're bottling that up into the VV so that when your collaborator wakes up and opens that VV, they will see that you left them a hotspot. They'll hear your voice. They'll have that productive hallucination. So that asynchronous communication is very important. I'll say that that's been the feature that the that our like most enthusiastic users at NBBJ have been most excited about, but it also has been the hardest feature to drive adoption for because of the culture of meetings in this industry. But I would encourage that, I certainly don't want to replace meetings, but it'd be nice if you could do messaging in this way.
So I can literally remember, because I'm doing this longer than you have, I think, when faxes arrived, and we would stand by the fax machine waiting for the expedited communication that we would then act on. But you've been thinking a lot about communication, how we work. You've been observing that not just in our practice, but in other firms around the world. And what are you seeing in terms of the communication lift? Certainly, I've witnessed the delight many times when clients immerse themselves in this kind of experience.
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things that our research has been disciplined around thinking about the fundamentals of human communication. So synchronous, asynchronous, meetings, messages, real-world renders, AR, VR. And that has kept us disciplined around building this general-purpose platform. What we have learned from our customers is that we have seen these kind of vertical use cases emerge. So the obvious one is the new business pursuit use case, where you can visit spaces that you've designed, do a spherical capture very inexpensively and quickly, and then give them a tour of 5 or 6 projects very rapidly. Also, being able to envision with them on their site and with their CAD concepts, you can do that. So the pursuit use case is an obvious one, but the ones that are more interesting are the ones that we did not anticipate. So I'll say that in terms of revenue, our largest revenue growth category is in construction, specifically in process and safety training. So being able to use this, safety training is not always the most compelling type of media. So being able to do that in an immersive way with a larger or small group, being able to do it asynchronously has been really an incredible learning. I didn't see that coming. That was exciting. And then job site communication. It's kind of crazy how people use FaceTime and video on the job site. Those technologies are not ideal. Being able to do that with VV has been cool.
Okay, so let's pivot back to the practice of interior design. And we're all dealing with various manufacturers, materials, products, furniture, often looking at 2D images, on our computer screens. And what's the potential for all that stuff to be nested and easily accessible in VV format?
Yeah, so this is a good time for me to mention that there's a biodiversity of amazing companies and startups in this category that are innovating in different areas around this domain. There's another Seattle-based company, Simply Augmented, that's really focused on the furniture vertical, for example, placing objects into the real world. There's many people that are doing the practice of projecting a digital object into the physical world in a way that you can test it. I'm sure are using many of those technologies. We don't necessarily do that particular pattern. But I do think that, I'll say this, a fluency of communicating in this way will become more and more and more important. So, you're all the absolute top of your field, incredibly good at communicating a vision and storytelling around space. But I will say that this is really a new vocabulary, and I have learned so much from how our customers have wielded this tool in ways that I never would have anticipated. I'm giddy with anticipation to see the ways that you use not just VV, but use augmented and virtual reality technologies broadly to stage someone's environment before you finish your work, for example.
Cool. So we're all overwhelmed with information. And you mentioned that VR is a speed bump on the way to AR. And it's intriguing to think about, is this just one more source of deluge and information that overwhelms us? Or are there other possibilities in these futures that might affect us in more productive or positive ways, or enhance our experiences in ways that don't just represent more? Yeah,
I mean, it's a great question. I think that it's my point of view that if you look at the continuum between AR and VR, VR really has been predominantly focused on entertainment applications. The systems and the platforms are focused on VR. Some early innovators in the category like Iris VR and Insight VR and Enscape and others have really done a great job of really forcing the enterprise conversation into those platforms that were mostly designed for consumer applications. It's not going to be the case with AR, mostly because of the price tag initially. So I think that the initial AR systems will be more expensive, and as a result of that, that will really catalyze the adoption of those systems in the enterprise first, I believe. And I think that many of the insights that you gain from interacting with some of these early VR systems will absolutely spill over into the domain of AR. So really don't think of these as distinct swim lanes, and certainly whatever you do, don't hold your breath until AR is broadly deployed. It's maybe more important than ever, knowing that AR is coming, that you develop a fluency in VR so that you can copy and paste those intuitions and even the creative skill into this new domain.
Right.
So I would say, don't wait.
So there's got to be a couple of good questions out here, and there are a couple of microphones. Does anyone want to jump into the conversation? Yes? Yes, please. Okay, we'll start where there's a microphone, and if we could bring a microphone to the front as well. Please.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, there we go. All right. All very exciting stuff. You've addressed the visual and audio portions of it. We have 5 senses. One of those is touch. Could you address the haptics side of this and how that's going to play? As an architect and designer, I want to touch and feel a material, or if I'm in my car, a little outside of the design realm, but that touch of a knob or a button as opposed to being distracted by my screen.
Yes.
Where's that going? Or where are we today with that?
Beautifully put. So your comment about the car is a very salient one in terms of many of us in the interaction design community don't necessarily observe that a move towards touchscreens without haptic feedback in automotive applications is good. I think that there's a lot of value to feeling a click or a knob and having that tuned properly. And we've moved away from that. And so it's an insightful question to say, is that happening now again in VR and AR? There has been some invention in haptics for applications in gaming. So being able to, feel recoil of a lightsaber, or being able to, the haptics of even the motion controllers are quite good in terms of tuning different types of interactions. But I would say, generally speaking, the move toward hand tracking is going to be a move away from those systems, simply because you need to wear something for that to work. So there's a couple different methods. One is that the notion of, there we go. So one method is that they put little air bladders in gloves, so that when you reach around something virtually, these inflate correctly, so you feel something. So that's something that's really still in the lab. They've been working on that since the 90s. There's obvious deployment considerations of that, but you can touch and feel things in that way. Actually, just wearing a watch with a good a multimodal haptic sensor can give you some good sensors, but I would say that we're not super far along on that in enterprise applications. I think we have some ground to cover on haptics.
I think it'll go.
Hello? Oh, hi. So I know for people who haven't used VR a lot, sometimes this would be like their first experience using it. Could you talk a little bit about cyber sickness and the awareness of it, and how to prevent it, and just best practices, so that their experience would be great the first time around?
I have one of my best bad parenting stories on this topic. So when we got a PlayStation VR in the house when my son was about 6.
Does this involve a mess?
And no, thank God, but he hazes me about this to no end. So around that time, EA released a X-Wing simulator in virtual reality. And why would humankind invent virtual reality if not to put a 6-year-old boy into an X-Wing fighter? Let's be honest. This is so critical. So I'm like, Bud, you got to experience this. It's amazing. It's totally great. And it kind of breaks rule number 1 of VR, which is you shouldn't be moving when you're not moving. Your brain if your brain senses that you're not moving, but your visual cortex thinks you're moving, it gets confused. And by the way, you might wonder, why is it that when you have bad VR, why does that make you sick to your stomach? Isn't that weird? That doesn't make much sense that your ocular system's behind, but you get uncomfortable in your stomach. Turns out that experts have a theory, which is that many, many generations ago, a common way for humans to die was to eat something poisonous. And when you eat something poisonous, you get a drop in frame rate. And the best way to survive that is to quickly throw up. So fast forward several hundred million years now, it's really hard for us to make good VR. Anyways, my son's like in there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're shooting TIE fighters, isn't this amazing? And he's like, Dad, I just don't feel so good, you know? And so the thing about that type of interaction is when you remove this sort of headset, it doesn't go right away. Like, it takes 4 hours maybe to kind of go away. So anyways, the moral of the story is that, number one, kids actually can use VR, but I would say you shouldn't have them, the general expertise is around 6 or 7 is about the right place to start, and generally you want to put them in VR for as many minutes as they are old in years. So, and then the other thing that's super important, which I learned the hard way, is only use the systems that have a one-to-one movement relationship. So if you are in a 6-DOF system where you move and the world moves, great. If you absolutely do not use any driving or flying. So there's a bunch of care has been taken in our experience to make sure when you're moving that we fade through black, to make sure that you don't get that uncomfortable sensation. But general rules are, don't move if you're not moving. And the expert gamers do some clever things of tailing your field of view when you're in motion, which mitigates those results. But generally speaking, you want to be careful about moving when you're not moving.
Cool, excellent. Other questions? Any other questions? Hands?
Looks like there's one up there.
Thank you. Yeah, up in the upper level.
Or I'm sorry, is there? It's hard to see with the lights. I apologize. Oh, you have one right there. Go ahead. Yeah.
How are you? So this is a 2-part question, potentially an implication within the first. So this is obviously the technology is moving very quickly, as you've implied. How do you see AR affecting workplace interactions? For example, right now we've got a computer monitor in front of us. And how do you see the future of tangible spaces evolving from that?
Yeah, I love this question. So on 2 dimensions. So the first one is just the machinery of computing is going to change quite dramatically, right? And initially we're going to do that thing where we, the first motion pictures just filmed people on stage because we have all this kind of emotional and intellectual baggage around, like, we don't really know how to wield the new thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to recreate screens in AR, which is incredibly silly. And so just like filming people on a play is not the best way to shoot a motion picture. So step one is we're going to have to reinvent our tools and our design processes. Microsoft has done some really interesting studies that transition that, where you're designing in 2 dimensions, but when you drag your cursor to the edge of the monitor, it pops out and you can click on things in the real world, or you can project 3-dimensional models in the real world and interact with them using a conventional interaction method. All of those things are going to be invented by Autodesk and Microsoft and Google and others. And so I would challenge those of you in this room to start thinking about what you need. What would you do if you could project anything? And we sometimes get a little caught up in the sci-fi of the day. The example I use is I call it the T-bot, transparent building on table, which is the one thing, like, everybody who thinks they want to put a building in the middle of the conference room table and all walk around it. It's probably not the right interaction model. We're not trying to recreate scale models in this environment. There's many different interaction models that you might invent. You're much better suited at inventing that than I am. The second thing I would say, which is a much more interesting topic for you, is when you walk into a space that you designed, you've lovingly crafted every single detail of the space so that somebody feels something, or somebody can find their way somewhere, or somebody can do something meaningful, wayfinding, et cetera. Well, that's all about to change, where there will be multiple layers on a space. And people will be able to project their own layers onto a space. But wow, wouldn't it be nice if you were responsible for designing at least one of those virtual layers when someone enters the space, that you were in control of the official layer for the building that presents digital and 3-dimensional information that complements the built environment nicely. One of the coolest conversations I had with a healthcare designer at NBBJ, Ryan Hollinger out of the Columbus studio, is I was talking about augmenting digital information over top of a hospital, and he instantly went in the opposite direction. He said, actually, you know what? The first thing I would do is think about, what can I now remove? there's all these cables and connectors, and how can I start to eliminate those? They still serve their function. They're available when the system recognizes I need them. In fact, it'll call your attention to an outlet when you need it, but I would love to take the fire sprinklers and the outlets and have them go away when they're not needed and really make it a more pleasant, blissful space. So that's an area that we're really pulling on that thread a little bit, because I think that this is a domain where having a unified cross-platform standard for how you publish content into that layer is going to be increasingly important. And that's an area where others are not really pursuing. So that's an area.
It's a great example of actual interior design.
Yeah.
And the way you're describing that. And as you've witnessed design teams in different firms apply this tool, what kinds of experiences are you seeing in terms of how they're working, the epiphanies that maybe their clients are seeing that they otherwise didn't, their ability to show before and after scenarios that couldn't easily have been replicated that way? That's where I see a kind of frontier of design communication.
Yes, or will that spill into the actual final project, right? So, right now I showed you ABC optioneering, like which one of these do you want? Well, maybe you design them all, and maybe the individual has a certain point of view where they like a certain, they're drawn to a certain material, or they're drawn to, and I'm the least qualified person in this room to make the decision about what's the right solution there, but different people will have strong points of view about how, like in user interfaces, skinability is a controversial topic. It's like in the Apple world and culture, it's like, no, we're going to make a call on what is the proper aesthetic and the proper interaction solution, and we're going to prescribe that. And in other worlds, it's about engaging with the user and saying, in like video gaming, for example, like, what should your character look like? How do you want your controls to function? Do you want to remap those? So there's a continuum there somewhere, and you will, in the decade to come, like literally those of you in this room, in this region, will find those rough edges sooner than anyone, and will really help to invent solutions.
So something I've witnessed, and then I'm going to jump up to this question, is that, as we all know, clients are trading in their belief and confidence and trust in what we're bringing forward as designers and as design thinking. And I have witnessed through this medium clients who you might describe as extremely conservative and pragmatic, finding comfort and confidence with extremely progressive thinking and ideas formally. And you'll have to trust me in terms of the significance of that leap, but specific to examples I've seen in this that I haven't seen in other typical platforms.
So that's super interesting. For example, you're saying that in a case where you have a client and you have a very bold potential solution, and it might be hard to get them there.
So a traditional 2D rendering might elicit there's no way we're going to do that. Let's back off. I've witnessed in the VR environment a more open-mindedness to trying to understand and comprehend, and because there's a higher fidelity of, okay, what is this really all about? How do I move through this space? How do I feel it?
Cool.
So just to add that to the conversation, let's come up to that question.
Yeah, so maybe this is kind of answered in some of what you just said, but you gave the example of augmented vase, I think, on the physical table there, and so there's this in line between things that are physical and things that are augmented. Does that line just kind of naturally move towards a more and more augmented experience, or maybe to say it another way, why use this as a representational tool? Like, when does that actually just become the experience, and we're not going to build that model that we just walked through, we're just going to pull out our phone and kind of live in it?
Yeah, no, it's a super interesting topic, right? And especially when you factor in that even now on a system like HoloLens 2, they're getting better at blending with the real world and with real-time ray tracing and lighting methods and higher frame rate display, higher opacity display. I can predict with pretty high confidence that 10 years from now, the most advanced systems, you will not be able to ascertain what are the digital objects and what are the actual objects. You will not necessarily, without removing your eyewear, be able to ascertain who's in the meeting and who's being digitally projected into the meeting. In the incredibly elegant words of my leader of design, and she and I have been collaborators for 15 years across multiple ventures, when we talk about this topic of like knowing what's virtual and knowing what's not, she summarizes it perfectly by saying, man, they better label that shit. Because it's like, you really, it's true. You really, as a human, need to know what's there and what's not there. If there's safety considerations, there's social considerations, and so never has it been so beautifully summarized as that.
Other questions? We got a couple more minutes here before we wrap up. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, just kind of right on what the gentleman behind me just said. Couldn't you take that one step further? You were talking about the watch, and being able to track that. And we're talking about using these things as design tools for the built environment. But wouldn't the natural, I'm thinking of like the holodeck on the Enterprise or whatever. Wouldn't the next step be pretty much that, like, well, why spend money to build that wall or put this material on this wall if everybody's wearing an augmented headset that they can just see?
There's
that?
definitely like some dystopian IIDA Black Mirror episode where we just want all white walls and we'll do it all digitally. Everyone will be handed glasses when they walk in the door. This is a deep well, and again, in our brief time together, we didn't really get a chance. There's a whole different conversation that sometimes I will lead around some of these considerations because it takes us to a new place, and maybe I'm predisposed to think that there's both positives and negatives to that expression. I'll say not just in the built environment, right? So if you might. When you're not in the workplace, you might want to have wings attached, and you might want that to be the reality that you progress. I might want to have more hair. Like I might, there's a whole tapestry of things that people can that will be able to augment. And so I think that in the workplace, let's let's fix it in post. Let's project that detailed element in there. That is a thing, but I would just say there's a positive to that. There's a twist to that, which is, I'll borrow a phrase from my colleague Sam Stubblefield, who describes projected light as a building surface, and I think as a building material. So start to think about it in that way, like start to think about augmented reality as just another building material, but it's interactive and it's animated, and you want to think it's no longer rectangular, and it should actually interplay beautifully with the actual built environment. So these are complex problems. There are certainly that scenario we think about a lot, but there's also this upside where you can say, oh, if I did have this digital canvas. So like one of the examples is in the healthcare use case. Imagine that you check in at the front desk and you have a pediatric healthcare facility. Rather than just saying follow the blue line, what if you had in that patient's record that she loves mermaids, and that there's a little mermaid that swims along the carpet and leaves a trail that guides her to her room, or there's many ways that you can bring magic into these settings, and that it's kind of wacky to think about that as a new form of infographics, but that's a real thing.
Yeah, really interesting. One more question. Anyone? Yes.
Hi. So it's really exciting to be able to project pretty much anything we can model and draw and imagine into a space and have a client experience it. But how do you see automation and AI coming into this, where we're not having to sit there, we're modeling the environment ourselves, to spending all the man hours doing the modeling, and then to get it into the program. Things to become more intuitive. I know you were talking about that the pen thing. Sorry, I forgot what it was called. The Google thing, and how kids see things differently and will draw it differently. But how does that translate to professionals in the field right now?
Steve, I would love for you to take this because you are an expert in computation, in computational design, and the interplay between computational design and human design.
I think it's a fascinating question, and there's a set of observations. There's a lot of directions to go there, but maybe if we orbit out and we think about our role as designers, there's the fundamental of both beauty and performance, the ineffable, the artistry, and the pragmatic. And with the advent of AI, with the advent of computational design and computing, is the opportunity to delineate performance, and by that, demystify value. And if we as designers can demystify value creation and understand what is really happening in terms of elevating performance, better throughput, more ideas, better healthcare delivered, whatever the case may be, it's a golden age for design. there's more opportunity and need in the world than we all together could ever provide. So that's kind of where I go when I start thinking about AI, not as, in fact, it can do really, really bad things and influence things in bad ways, as we know, but to the opposite, it can also influence things and be a really productive tool. So the intersection with virtual reality, where do you go with that?
Yeah, so I would say that some of the most magical human-machine interactions that I've witnessed have been those that bring the human to a new place, creatively enhanced by the machine. So I actually don't think much about this dystopian future of where every building is laid out programmatically using algorithmic approach. But I do get excited about how a skilled designer could wield machine learning methods to be able to bring more daylight to more people, or being able to organize a space to facilitate serendipitous interactions between their peers. And very seldom do these modern systems that use machine learning just you fire and forget them, right? But instead, you really have to know how to ask meaningful questions in a structured form, and you want that to inform your design. And that can be expressed in terms of performance, and it can be expressed in terms of aesthetics. Now, some of the coolest VVs I've seen are ones that actually don't just show you variance based on the built environment, but they actually project digital information into the VV. So, for example, like demonstrating daylight studies, or demonstrating grasshopper computational foot pattern through a space, things like that. So I would just say that machine learning and how it informs the design process will have significant impact. The impact to AR is that you'll be able to light that stuff up and see it, maybe even in real time, right? So the complementary technology to AR is that room sensing technology that's on your forehead is now being deployed into the space, right? So there's, in retail and in gaming, in casinos, they now have very precise spatial tracking, so they know exactly where people are walking, how they're moving, how they're purchasing, what shelf they're getting things off of. That's going to happen in other industries and will help inform design. As design professionals will be able to see that.
Yeah, so we'll wrap on this point, and I'll just observe, and in fact, I think it's a nice kind of tie-in to your whole talk tonight, is, you've been exposed to this new thinking in technology and communication, in the potential of VR, and ultimately, whether it's machine learning, AI, and its interactions with what we do, these all represent the frontier of technology, and we have to stay curious and interested, and as you've suggested, John, start using these tools in ways that set us up for being leaders of design. We're still going to articulate what gets built, what people buy into, what they do, and this is an important stepping stone into that. I do have to end with one question. There's a lot of really important scientific study and news in the world right now that indicates, and I'm really quite nervous about this point, is if we are doing more VR, are our horns, are they going to grow more rapidly in the back of our head, or are we going to be okay, especially in a visual vocal environment?
I think we're safe. I do wonder if we use these systems for many hundreds of millions of years, if we develop additional eyes. I'm not sure what's going to happen in that way, but I think generally speaking, the technology will track to the humans, not the other way around.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give it up. Now, please feel free to go out and enjoy more of those really special cocktails. Don't forget to go to the CEU table if you want to get your CEU units. And have a great evening and drive carefully. Safe travels home. Thank you.